Hi, this is Shannon at No Shelf Control. Thanks for joining me today. I am coming to you today with a 5-star book review. The book I want to talk about today is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty. That's Doughty. I believe when I introduced this book on my TBR video, I called her Caitlin Doughty, but now after having listened to the book for almost 8 hours, I am well aware that it's pronounced Doughty, so I want to get that correct. I did listen to this book on audiobook. It is 7 hours and 45 minutes. It was great. It went quickly. I listened to my audiobooks in my car. I really enjoyed coming back to it, was always looking forward to it, and had, a couple of instances where I sat in the car for a few extra minutes to listen to the rest of what was going on in a chapter. Now, I have to tell you, this book is somewhat disturbing. It is called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory. So it is literally about a young woman who goes to work in a funeral home with cremation services, and she runs the cremation machine. So there is a lot here that is disturbing and difficult to listen to. And I know some of you will think, how could you have given this 5 stars? You told us you don't like gore, you don't like horror. Why would you listen to this book? And why, would you give it 5 stars? Well, it was recommended to me by 2 different friends, which is, enough for me to want to look into it. And really, yes, there are definitely parts of this book that are difficult, but it all was very relevant to what she was trying to communicate. I didn't find any of the gory, icky stuff gratuitous. I felt like she was painting a picture of what death is like in our country and in other cultures, and that it was important to what she was trying to say. So I didn't feel like she was just being gory for the sake of being gory. And that really, I don't usually tolerate well. So this I enjoyed. And I thought everything that she pointed out was relevant to her story. I want to read you the synopsis. It says, most people want to avoid thinking about death, but Caitlin Doughty, a 20-something with a degree in medieval history and a flair for the macabre, took a job at a crematory, turning morbid curiosity into her life's work. Thrown into a profession of gallows humor and vivid characters, both living and very dead, Caitlin learned to navigate the secretive culture of those who care for the deceased. Smoke Gets in Your Eyes tells an unusual coming-of-age story full of bizarre encounters and unforgettable scenes. Caring for dead bodies of every color, shape, and affliction, Caitlin soon becomes an intrepid explorer in the world of the dead. She describes how she swept ashes from the machines and sometimes onto her clothes, and reveals the strange history of cremation and undertaking, marveling at bizarre and wonderful funeral practices from different cultures. Her eye-opening, candid, and often hilarious story is like going on a journey with your bravest friend to the cemetery at midnight. So I really think that Caitlin Doughty does an amazing job demystifying death, and I think that was her purpose. She has a blog and a Twitter account, and she has a separate identity out in the internet. If you look up Caitlin Doughty, you will find her. She looks sort of like a bebop tattoo artist, dark black hair, the red lipstick, not vampira, but, very pretty young woman. And you will find her identity. She does have a blog and answers lots of questions about death and does a lot of proactive work on helping people understand death and how we do death in this country. This book reminded me just a little bit of Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, where he, as a doctor, talks about the aging process and how we age in the United States as compared to other places. There was a lot of this book about death that reminded me of Gawande's book about aging and the education that Caitlin Doughty wants to do with this book. Now, there's a whole nother aspect of this book that is very Samantha Irby. It is very, slapstick. She gets into all of the bizarre and uncomfortable parts of working with the dead, working with the families of the dead. It is very macabre in places. And there is some humor. I think that in order to do a job like this, you would have to keep your sense of humor about you. And you can't get too emotionally invested. Caitlin Doughty says this in the book, you can't get too emotionally invested in everybody and every family that comes across your path. or it'll kill you. So I thought the book was well written, a nice mix of educational and entertaining. Let's see. She talked about the concept of a good death. And this was the part of the book that I really enjoyed. She talks about some concepts in our culture, the idea that you must be embalmed, the idea that we can't keep bodies in our homes for more than 2 hours after they've passed away, that it's a, hygiene risk or a sanitation concern. And the fact that a lot of those things are not true, that you actually do not have to embalm a body, that it is okay to keep a body at home for a significant period of time to allow the family to wash the body or say goodbye or do things like that, but that the funeral industry is just that. It's an industry. And there are things that they promote and put forward that may not be as true as we, the general population, think they are. And I think Caitlin Doughty has become somewhat unpopular with the mainstream funeral industry because she puts forward these ideas. But I loved it. I loved hearing about her life growing up in Hawaii, and how things were done with her own grandmother, the regrets that she had when her grandmother passed away. And I just really took in a lot of what Caitlin Doughty shares about what it means to have a good death to her. And some of her ideas are different than maybe what I took away. What I might define as my good death or a good death for someone in my family is probably very different than what Caitlin Doughty landed on at the end of her story. But she gave me enough information to be able to think about that intelligently and successfully, and to not be afraid to look at it, to ask questions, to think about it. And I think that's really, really important. I learned about some things that I never would have known of in this book, things like witness cremation and a home funeral. I had no idea that you could keep a body at home and have a funeral in your own home. I did not know that there is a fee for going to a crematorium and being allowed to witness the body being burned and to have the right and honor to push the button to do that. Those were things that I found fascinating that she shared in this book that I never would have known of otherwise. You've heard me say before, I always look at the reviews of a book when I finished it. I don't like to read the reviews ahead of time, but when I finished it, especially the really bad reviews, if I really liked a book, I like to find out what it is other people are complaining about. What did I miss? Or is it just the fact that people will complain about anything? And sometimes I think that's absolutely it. But two of the big things that I read in the negative reviews for this book were about fat shaming. Caitlin does a whole vignette about the fact that overweight bodies tend to smell once they have become deceased. And it's simply a fact. The more fat that you have on your body, the more stench there is in, the process of decaying. And people were just up in arms about that in the reviews, that she's fat shaming. I don't know, as a not skinny person myself, I didn't find that to be fat shaming. I found it to be sharing of facts and more of the circumstances of what she faced in her job. So I didn't take offense to that, but if that is something that will bother you, it may be a book you want to stay away from. Trigger warnings in general. There is a whole chapter, and I cannot say enough that this book is uncomfortable. There is a whole chapter about babies that pass away and what happens in that process. And you may think that was not necessary, but it was fascinating. It's very different than what happens with adults and how these things are handled in hospitals and with families and with babies that pass away before they're born. There's a lot of good information there that she shares that I never would have had insight into otherwise. And I just didn't find it irreverent at all. But so child death, infant death, suicide, depression, those are all trigger warnings that I would mention around this book. And then certainly just the ick factor. If you cannot handle discussions of body fluids and blood and things like that, this is a book you're going to want to stay away from, because this is the nitty gritty of what it is to work with dead bodies. I found this book very hopeful. I found it not just hopeful, but helpful. I felt like it was a dose of reality that I don't have a friend or anybody I know who is in the funeral industry that I would ask these questions of. And I don't know that it would have even occurred to me to ask these questions had I not come across this book. There were definitely moments where I was like, why am I listening to this? But it was all very helpful and healthful at the end of getting through the story. I was glad that I listened to it. I think it'll be of tremendous help to me in planning things for family members that may pass away and or my own death. And I think that part of Caitlin's point is we need to think about these things. We hide death, we bury it, and we try not to see it. And it makes us afraid. It makes things hard to deal with. It makes everything a big secret. And that's, maybe not the most healthful way to deal with it. So I really appreciated this book, enjoyed it, was glad that I read it, even though there were moments when it was cringy. But I would highly recommend it. If you have interest in learning something, learning about our culture and how we do things in this particular aspect of life, I would take it on. It's entertaining and educational, and I really value that in a book. So thanks for listening to me today. I will be back with more book reviews soon. Please smash that subscribe and like button, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.